Hi, this is Don, the old school fish guy, and I know it's been a while since I've been on video, and for all of those who have asked, thank you very much. I do appreciate it. My health is up and down, and I'm not healing as fast as the doctors predicted. But I saw a specialist recently, and she says I'm old enough that it's going to take a while. So the long-term prognosis is good. Right now I struggle from day to day. Some days good, some days bad, more good than bad. I also struggle with motivation, and that's the biggest reason I haven't been doing videos. I keep wanting to, but I have delayed. I think I'm ready to start again. I tried once before. Let's try again. So with that said, I'm going to talk about things that didn't work back in the old days. A couple people, two, have actually asked me to name some of the things that didn't work back in the old days. Of course, there were quite a few things that didn't work. We've learned a lot, and that's why there's a reason to do things the new school way. But I do a lot of things the old school way, and some the new. So I'm starting with a nice easy video, and this is it. One of the first things that came to mind was incandescent lighting. It didn't work on a small tank. Big tank didn't really matter. Well, it did. Here's the thing. Before incandescent lighting on top of the tank in metal hoods with two bulbs and blah, sometimes they'd put a light bulb, I mentioned this before, put a light bulb in a mason jar and then put the mason jar underwater with, you know, a little bit of the lid, the top out of the water. And that was both a heater and a source of light. You know, and before that they used Bunsen inverters under the slate bottoms. They didn't have glass bottoms. Anyway, back to the lighting. So incandescent lighting, it didn't really work, not for me. Now if you have a 10-gallon tank, it came with typically 2 incandescent lights inside of a metal hood, and what happened was it cooked the top of the water. It could be, if you put thermometers in the top and the bottom, the temperature difference could be 4, 6, maybe 8 degrees Fahrenheit. So incandescent lighting, the bigger your tank, the better it worked. But it had the added advantage you didn't have to use your heater much, at least not during the day. Speaking of heaters, one thing that didn't work in the old days was heaters. Yeah, they actually were more reliable than we'd like to pretend they were. You know, we like to exaggerate, I get it. But heaters didn't always work in the old days. So you still hear residual stories about, and it occasionally happens today, but my heater got stuck open, the temperature on the tank went from 78 degrees to 94 degrees overnight. It can happen. Back in the old days, it was far more common. So what some did, what I did, was I typically had 2 heaters in every aquarium. Both heaters were inadequate to heat the tank. Between them, they were barely adequate. That way, if one of them got stuck open, the tank temperature raised, but not a lot. If one of the heaters got stuck closed, meaning not on, the other heater wasn't adequate to keep the tank heated, but it wouldn't go frigid. Now if you're checking your tanks multiple times a day, that's probably not a big deal, and even back then it didn't happen a lot. So there you go. Speaking of heaters and the lighting, yeah, one of the things I learned back then, and you can still do today, is I often used 2 thermostats in, or thermometers in every tank. and I'd move them around. I'd have one on the front top and one on the back rear. I'd have one on the left side, one on the right side, both at the top. I'd have, you know, two at the bottom in different places. And I'd move them around just so that I could monitor what my tank was like overall. It's interesting to do that, and if you make a chart and where you put the thermometers, leave them for a couple days, even 24 hours, and check the temperature multiple times during that period, it can be fascinating. Another thing that didn't work back in the old days was dirt. People that did planted tanks, they wanted to use dirt. I talked in a video last year, the year before, about peat. I love peat, P-E-A-T. I got a cousin named Pete. I love him too, but peat, I covered mine with sand and it worked great. And then I went to transplant a plant. When I pulled it up, peat came with the roots. It got all over in the aquarium, and yeah, sure, it settles down and you can clean it out. It's fine. Harder with sand than with gravel, but you know, it still works. Dirt was worse. And it wasn't just when you tried to uproot a plant that dirt got bad. Anything, some fish, dig in it a little bit, dirt's up everywhere. It didn't work. Not in my book. So speaking of that, aquarium gravel. Back in the 60s and 70s, aquarium gravel, the multicolored pretty stuff. I like black. It's the only color I ever buy. I like dark substrates. Most fish to me look better on dark substrates. You want to see something pretty? Get some albino cories, a school of about 15 in a 30-gallon long, and put them in there with a black substrate. I prefer black diamond blasting sand, but back in the old days I used aquarium gravel. And with cories, you'll hear the legend that cories will dig in the gravel and wear their barbels away from all the rough edges, and that's not true. Perhaps some cories. I never really had that problem, but they love digging in the sand more. They just dig at the surface of the gravel. With sand, they'll stick their snout right down in there. So aquarium gravel doesn't work for me, except if and when I get around to setting up a shrimp tank. I want to do one. I'm going to do a 20-gallon. It's going to have a gravel substrate, and that's because I want to put an under gravel filter under part of the aquarium, and aquarium gravel is perfect for that. Speaking of shrimp, brine shrimp back in the old days, oh my goodness. Oh, it worked. You know, a lot of hobbyists, especially the big shots, they just thrilled us with stories of brine shrimp and the great successes they had. I'm not sure how well it worked. The problem with brine shrimp, well, first off, it was a little expensive back then, but it's not in the natural diet of most fish. A lot of them eat shrimp of some kind, but not brine shrimp. And I don't know exactly what's going on, but some people have said that brine shrimp causes fattiness. Yeah, maybe so. Brine shrimp lost favor for a while, but not much. It's still very popular, and I don't see much wrong with it. It's the same as tubifex. Many people said tubifex is bad because it makes your fish fat. It depends on what the tubifex is fed. Brine shrimp is, you know, usually less of an issue there. Do they make the fish fat? You know, in the late 70s I started hearing that about both of them, and people were going away from them. You know, obviously they came back. What I tell you what didn't work about tubifex is I kept them in a little margarine container in my wife's refrigerator. I say wife's refrigerator because she let me know it was her refrigerator when she found Tubifex in a dish. Yeah, that didn't work too good. Tubifex. You know what also didn't work very good is Tubifex feeding rings. If you're going to use Tubifex feeding rings, you better have enough rings so that all your fish can get to the feeding ring. Otherwise, the biggest will bully everyone else away, and it causes problems. And if you have enough feeding rings to get everyone up to a feeding ring, the problem is if you add very many Tubifex worms, they get tired of eating them, and some of the Tubifex will drift out and they actually get embedded in the sand, gravel, whatever, and they can proliferate quite nicely. I had an aquarium. It was a 29-gallon that it was for all my best breeding cories, not only my only breeding cories, but my favorites. And in that tank, the bottom was a sea of Tubifex waving in the air, and as a fish went by, they all shrunk right down and pulled back. It almost looked like a flag waving. My cories loved the Tubifex. It's pretty much, I drop in a few tablets, usually something that was green based, so they get some veggie matter, but my cories, for the most part, Tubifex was the biggest part of their diet. You know what also didn't work in the old days and still doesn't work, speaking of Tubifex, is freeze-dried cubes of food. You know, it looks good. You put it in the water, get it a little wet, you squeeze it against the glass and it'll stick there. Well, no, it don't. If you use it, just remember your fish, the first couple fish that pick at it are going to pull it right off from the glass, depending on how big they are. Neon Tetra is probably not going to pull it away very fast, but and then it floats all over. If you've got a lot of plants, it gets embedded in the plants, fish don't see it. It's never been a big problem for me, but it just doesn't work like they advertise. Boy, I can't think of too much right now. Oh, I got one more for you. Air pumps without a backflow protection device. Now that burned me more than once. If you got an air pump, I got to the point where I had all my air pumps above the level of the aquarium, because if an air pump breaks, the water comes right out that tube and goes right out all over the floor. Anyway, some old school ways that didn't work, more or less. Hey, I hope you all have a wonderful day. Thank you for watching. Bye.